The neuron structure, all of us know this is the primary structure of the neuron, and here predominantly we have the soma followed by the axon. So the soma is also called the cell body. The soma is like the cell body, and here is where all the mitochondria and all the essential nucleus and everything of the cell is present. From here all the metabolism will happen and neurotransmitters will be produced, and finally they will be transported across this axon, and they finally will reach a particular place called as the axon terminal. So whenever any impulse reaches the soma, then this neurotransmitter can be released. This axonal terminal will also have the storage vesicles for the neurotransmitters. And there is something like an hairy projection seen in all neurons. What is this? It is nothing but the dendrites. These dendrites, they are many in number. What they do is they collect impulses from all of them, and finally they will give their input to the cell body. Depending upon the amount of stimulus, whether the action potential is generated or not, we will see it in the next chapters. Then there is two important information here, that is the initial segment and the node of Ranvier. This initial segment and node of Ranvier, both of them are capable of generating action potential, because the number of transmitters, the number of sodium channels here are many in number, and that is the reason both of them are capable of generating action potential. Then their question arises, where does the action potential initiate in a different kind of neurons? So we have to address that. So that becomes an MCQ here. It starts in initial segment for some group of neurons, it starts in node of Ranvier for the some group of neurons. Next thing is, usually some of the axons are called as myelinated axons and another group is called as non-myelinated axon. What is myelination? It is just the wrapping up of the axonal sheath with the myelin. This is the myelin sheath we have drawn here. Some of them will be unmyelinated also. But what is the myelin sheath in the central nervous system? The myelin sheath is formed by the oligodendrocyte cells. Whereas in the peripheral nervous system, the myelin sheath is formed by Schwann cells. So this is also important information. So this is the basic axonal structure. Now let's talk more about the initial and node of Ranvier. I told you both of them can generate the action potential, but whichever comes in first in contact, that will be generating the action potential. For a motor neuron, this is the structure. This is the structure of a motor neuron. It receives impulses from other things and it passes down to the axon and it activates the terminal photons. Whereas in case of sensory system, what happens here? This is the sensory neuron. What happens here? First the touch is felt, but the cell body is somewhere else. The cell body will be in the dorsal root ganglia. That is, the cell body will be somewhere here. So the node of Ranvier starts here itself and the cell body will be here where the initial segment is there. So now let's try to understand where the action potential starts in case of motor neuron. In a motor neuron, the dendrites are receiving the impulses and they will be sending it to the next part, like the soma of the neuron. Finally, they will reach the first segment here. What is this segment here? This segment is nothing but our initial segment. So in a motor neuron, the initial segment comes in contact with the potentials first. So the action potential is also generated in the initial segment. So this is the answer for a motor neuron. But if the question asks, where does the action potential generated in case of a sensory neuron? It is not the initial segment, because the sensations, like if I am touching it or feeling it, are felt here, and the first place they reach here is the node of Ranvier. And node of Ranvier, all of us know, it has tremendous amount of sodium channels, even more than the initial segment. So the action potential will start at the node of Ranvier. So if the question is for sensory neuron, then our answer is completely different. So we have to go in for the node of Ranvier. So node of Ranvier is our answer here. But in general, they don't specify the type of neuron. They just give where is the action potential generated, and they give the options like initial segment, node of Ranvier, then axonal terminal and the soma. What will be your answer? We go for initial segment, because this is the most common type of neuron that is being represented as a neuronal structure. So it starts at the initial segment. But as and when the question specifies sensory neuron, we should always go for the node of Ranvier. This is very important information. Just remember this. Then coming to the axonal transport. Nowadays, the axonal transport is in trend, so we'll try to address them nicely. So first thing is, whenever any neurotransmitter or anything is produced, they will be transported from the soma to the axonal terminal. But at the same time, some of the substances from the periphery are also sent back inside the neuron. Like there is both kind of transport. One transport is called as anterograde transport. Anterograde means from the cell body towards the nerve terminal, whereas retrograde means from the nerve terminal towards the cell body. So another group is called as retrograde. Both kind of transport are present in the neuron. But we have to know what is the molecular motor or what is the messenger which is carrying the information forward and which is carrying it backward. For forward information, like it will be carrying, it will be walking. It's like they say it's like as if the person is walking on the microtubules. Microtubules in our cytoskeletal system itself we have studied. It is the skeleton which is inside the cell. So it is like a pathway where the molecular motors can walk and go. So this anterograde transport is done by a specific molecule called kinesin. It is done by a specific molecule called as kinesin. What is the neurotransmitters? What are the substances transported by it? It transports various substances like neurotransmitter, growth factor, then mitochondria. All the substances produced in the cell body are taken in an anterograde direction by the kinesin. This is important. Next comes the retrograde transport. Retrograde transport or the reverse transport, it happens for some substances like the growth factor, toxins and viruses. And this retrograde transport is done with the help of a substance called as dynein. A few years back, one question was asked. A person was infected with rabies and it is traveling to the nerve. It is a kind of retrograde transport because viruses from the periphery, they enter the nerve system through this retrograde transport. And especially two important viruses, herpes virus and rabies virus, they get transported by this retrograde transport. And they asked what is the molecular motor involved. Both of them were in the option. So dynein is our option because since it is a retrograde transport. Growth factors, toxins and viruses, they are transported in a retrograde fashion. So just remember this information.